December 3rd, 1908, 7:45 a.m., outside the gates of Waterloo Dock, Liverpool. Thomas Brennan stood in a crowd of 340 men, all pressing forward as the dock foreman emerged with a clipboard. 34 years old, married with 4 children, Brennan had worked these docks for 16 years, but owned nothing. No contract, no guarantee, no certainty he would eat that day. The foreman needed 80 men for the morning shift. 260 would walk home with empty pockets. This scene repeated twice every working day at dozens of dock gates across Liverpool's 7 miles of waterfront, a brutal economic lottery that determined whether thousands of families ate or starved. Liverpool in 1908 stood as the British Empire's second busiest port after London, handling 23 million tons of cargo annually. The city's docks stretched from Herculaneum Dock in the south to Gladstone Dock in the north, a vast industrial complex of 36 individual dock basins connected by locks and channels. 7,000 registered dock workers competed for approximately 4,500 available positions each day, and the system that matched men to jobs had remained unchanged since the 1850s. The call-on. The call-on operated with simple brutality. Dock foremen arrived at gate entrances twice daily. Time equals 400 milliseconds greater than once at 8 a.m. for the morning shift and again at 1 p.m. for the afternoon. Men gathered at these gates beginning an hour before, sometimes longer if work had been scarce. The foreman surveyed the crowd and selected workers by sight, by reputation, by personal favor, or by bribe. A foreman might call out names: Murphy, O'Brien, Williams, or he might simply point. Those selected walked through the gate. Those rejected dispersed to the next dock, hoping for better luck, or went home defeated. Thomas Brennan understood the mathematics. Waterloo Dock employed approximately 200 men on a full day. Time equals 350 milliseconds / greater than, but 400 showed up at the gates. The Alexandra Dock needed 150, but 300 arrived. Across the entire Liverpool dock system, roughly 7,000 men competed for work that could only employ 4,500 on the busiest days and as few as 2,000 during slow weeks. The surplus labor pool existed by design. Shipping companies and dock authorities wanted more men available than jobs required, ensuring they could always fill positions immediately when ships arrived. The work itself paid 6 pence per hour in 1908, approximately 3 shillings for a full day's shift. A docker needed to work at least 5 full days per week to earn enough to support a family. 15 shillings weekly at minimum, but the casual nature of the call-on system meant most men averaged only 3 to 4 days of work per week, earning between 9 and 12 shillings. Housing cost 4 shillings weekly for a 2-room tenement in the Scotland Road area where many dockers lived. Food for a family of 6 required another 8 shillings. Medical care, clothing, coal for heating. These expenses exceeded what casual dock labor provided. Brennan had developed strategies over his 16 years. He arrived at gates 90 minutes early to position himself at the front where foremen could see him clearly. He maintained eye contact when the foreman scanned the crowd. He had learned which foreman preferred which types of workers. Some selected the youngest and strongest. Others chose experienced men who could operate steam cranes or work in ship holds without supervision. He cultivated relationships, buying rounds of drinks for foremen at the Baltic Fleet pub on Wapping Street, though this cut into his meager earnings. He dressed better than he could afford, keeping 1 clean shirt and 1 pair of trousers without patches specifically for the call-on, because foremen associated shabby appearance with unreliable work. Even with these strategies, Brennan secured work only about 60% of the time. 4 days per week on average. His wife Ellen took in washing. Time equals 350 milliseconds, earning an additional 2 shillings weekly. His oldest son, 11-year-old Michael, worked as a street vendor selling newspapers, contributing perhaps 1 shilling. The family survived, but barely, and every illness or unexpected expense threatened collapse into genuine destitution. The morning of December 3rd unfolded like thousands before it. Brennan had walked from his tenement on Sylvester Street to Waterloo Dock, arriving at 6:30 a.m., though the call-on would not begin until 8. He positioned himself in the third row of men, close enough to be seen, but not so pushy as to irritate the foreman. The temperature sat at 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Time equals 350 milliseconds, with heavy fog rolling off the Mersey, the kind of wet cold that penetrated wool coats and settled into bones. Other men arrived steadily. Patrick Dolan, 42, who had injured his back 2 months earlier and struggled with heavy lifting but needed work desperately. James Sullivan, 28, recently married, trying to establish himself as reliable. Old Samuel Kirkland, 61, who had worked these docks for 40 years and possessed more skill than 10 younger men combined, but whose age made foremen hesitate. Young Eddie Murphy, 19, strong as an ox, but inexperienced and prone to mistakes that damaged cargo. The crowd represented every variation of desperation and hope. At 7:58 a.m., foreman Andrew Sutton emerged from the dock office. Sutton controlled hiring for Waterloo Dock's southern berths, where 3 ships currently sat. The SS Majestic inbound from New York with 800 tons of grain and timber, the SS Cordelia from Buenos Aires with frozen beef, and the SS Manchester Commerce from Bombay with raw cotton and jute. The work would be heavy, skilled, dangerous. Sutton needed 80 men. He carried a clipboard and pencil. Sutton scanned the crowd without expression. He called the first. Name. Brennan. Thomas pushed forward, relief flooding through him. The call-on had worked in his favor. He would eat today. His children would eat. He walked through the gate. Sutton continued calling names, 79 more, selecting men he trusted or men who had slipped him a few pence earlier. Patrick Dolan's name was called despite his injury. Sutton knew him as reliable. Samuel Kirkland received work. Experience mattered for this particular cargo. But James Sullivan stood waiting, and Eddie Murphy, and 258 others. At 8:07 a.m., Sutton finished his selections and walked back inside. Time equals 500 milliseconds. The rejected crowd began to disperse. Sullivan walked north toward Alexandra Dock, 2 miles distant, where the 1 p.m. call-on might offer opportunity. Murphy headed south to Herculaneum. The others scattered across Liverpool's waterfront, chasing rumors of ships arriving unexpectedly, or they returned home to wait until 1 p.m. and try again. Some stopped at pubs to drown disappointment in cheap gin, though spending money on drink when they had earned nothing made their situations worse. Inside Waterloo Dock, Brennan and the 79 other selected men received their assignments. Brennan joined a gang of 12 loading timber from the SS Majestic's forward hold onto railway cars, waiting on the quayside. The timber consisted of pine planks, 12 feet long, bound in bundles of 20 planks each, weighing approximately 300 pounds per bundle. The work required 4 men to lift each bundle using steel hooks, carry it 40 feet from ship to rail car, stack it carefully, and return for the next bundle. The gang would move an estimated 600 bundles during the 8-hour shift, 150 bundles per 4-man team, approximately 20 bundles per hour, 1 bundle every 3 minutes. The physical toll was immense. After the first hour, Brennan's hands had cramped around the steel hooks. After 3 hours, his back and shoulders burned with fatigue. The work permitted no rest. The shipping company paid by tonnage moved per hour, and foremen pushed gangs to maintain speed. Slow gangs lost future call-on opportunities. Injured men lost their places immediately, replaced by the reserve pool of desperate workers waiting outside every dock gate. At noon, the morning shift paused for a 30-minute meal break. Brennan ate bread and cheese Ellen had wrapped for him, drank water from a communal barrel, and sat on a railway sleeper. His hands shook slightly from exhaustion. 5 more hours remained. Outside the gates, the 1 p.m. call-on had already begun gathering men. James Sullivan stood among a crowd of 290 at Waterloo Docks, northern entrance where foreman David Webb would select 70 workers for the afternoon shift. Different foremen controlled different dock sections, and each operated independently. Sullivan had walked back from Alexandra Dock after failing to secure morning work there. He had now been rejected twice in 5 hours and was calculating whether he could afford to miss another day. Webb emerged at 1:04 p.m. He surveyed the crowd, consulted his clipboard, and began calling names. Sullivan was not among them. For the second time that day, he walked away empty-handed. No income, no prospects until tomorrow's 8 a.m. call-on. His wife Mary was 4 months pregnant with their first child. The rent on their room in a lodging house on Banastre Street came due in 3 days, 2 shillings 6pence. Sullivan had earned nothing in 2 days and now faced the possibility of eviction before his child was born. The mathematics of the call-on system created what economists would later term a reserve army of labor. Shipping companies benefited enormously. They paid workers only for hours actually worked, carrying no responsibility for wages during slow periods. They maintained perpetual competition among workers, keeping wages suppressed because desperate men would accept any terms. They eliminated unions by threatening that union members would simply never be called on. The system transferred all risk from employers to workers. Shipping delays, weather problems, market fluctuations. All these factors affected workers' incomes while companies paid only for productivity delivered. Liverpool's dock owners and shipping companies defended the system as necessary and efficient. They argued that shipping was inherently unpredictable. Vessels arrived at irregular intervals depending on wind, weather, and tides. Cargo volumes fluctuated with market demand and seasonal patterns. Maintaining a permanent workforce large enough to handle peak demand would mean paying men to stand idle during slow periods, which they claimed would make British shipping uncompetitive against foreign rivals. The call-on system, they insisted, allowed flexible labor deployment matching actual cargo handling needs. The workers experienced something different. The call-on system meant perpetual uncertainty. A docker never knew from one day to the next whether he would work. He could not plan, could not save, could not commit to regular expenses. If his child needed medicine, he might not be able to afford it. If his rent came due on a week when he secured only 2 days' work, he faced eviction. The psychological weight of this uncertainty matched or exceeded the physical toll of the labor itself. The system also bred corruption. Foremen held absolute power over men's livelihoods. This power invited bribes. A docker might slip a foreman 6pence in exchange for preferential treatment at the call-on, but this meant spending part of his wages before earning them, and there was no guarantee the foreman would honor the arrangement. Foremen showed favoritism toward relatives, toward drinking companions, toward men who performed small services. The call-on became not just an economic transaction, but a social hierarchy built on patronage and obligation. Women bore particular burdens. Dockers' wives managed household finances with irregular, unpredictable income. They made impossible choices. Buy food or pay rent, purchase medicine or keep the lights burning, send children to school or send them to work. They took in washing, cleaned houses, sold items from stalls, anything to supplement uncertain dock wages. The twice-daily nature of the call-on meant women often did not know until mid-afternoon whether their husbands would bring home any earnings that day. Dinner preparations depended on income that might or might not materialize. Children suffered most visibly. In dock neighborhoods like Scotland Road, Vauxhall, and Toxteth, child malnutrition was endemic. Dr. Harold Wilson, who operated a clinic on Great Howard Street, recorded in his journal that approximately 40% of children he examined showed signs of inadequate nutrition, stunted growth, rickets, anemia. School attendance was sporadic because families needed children's labor during fathers' unemployed periods. Educational attainment was minimal. The cycle perpetuated itself. Children of dockers became dockers because they lacked education for other work, and they raised children in the same conditions. By 1908, resistance had begun organizing. The National Union of Dock Laborers, founded in 1889, had survived initial Sargenia, employer opposition, and maintained approximately 2,000 members in Liverpool despite the call-on system's union-suppressing design. Union organizers like James Sexton argued for fundamental reform. Registered employment, guaranteed minimum hours, elimination of the twice-daily call-on lottery. They drew inspiration from London's 1889 dock strike, which had won concessions, including a minimum wage of 6 pence per hour. On December 3rd, as Thomas Brennan loaded his 487th bundle of timber, and James Sullivan walked home to explain to his pregnant wife that he had earned nothing, Sexton addressed 130 union members at a meeting room above the Crown Hotel on Lime Street. He outlined plans for a strike that would begin the following spring, demanding decasualization of dock labor, permanent employment, regular hours, fair wages. The strike would materialize in May 1911, involving 70,000 workers across Britain's major ports, and it would force changes that began dismantling the call-on system. But those changes lay in the future. On this December afternoon, the system continued operating exactly as designed. Brennan finished his shift at 5 p.m., having loaded 600 bundles totaling 90 tons of timber. His hands were blistered, his back ached, his shoulders felt like they had been beaten with clubs. The foreman paid him 3 shillings. Time equals 450 milliseconds / 1 day's wage. He would return tomorrow at 6:30 a.m. for the next call-on, competing again with 300 other men for 80 positions. Sullivan would also return, hoping for better luck, knowing that 3 days without work meant genuine crisis. The call-on system persisted in Liverpool until the Dock Workers Regulation Act of 1946 finally abolished casual labor in British ports and established registered employment with guaranteed minimum hours. For nearly a century before that reform, thousands of men stood twice daily at dock gates across Liverpool, subjected to economic lottery that treated human beings as disposable commodities to be selected or rejected at a foreman's whim. The system enriched shipping companies while grinding workers and their families down into poverty that should have been preventable in the world's most industrialized nation. Thomas Brennan walked home to Sylvester Street that December evening, carrying 3 shillings and the knowledge that tomorrow he would face the same gates, the same crowd, the same uncertainty. The fog had thickened over the Mersey, and Liverpool's gas lamps were being lit. Somewhere across the city, James Sullivan sat at a table with his wife, calculating how many more days they could survive without his income. The docks never stopped moving cargo, and the call-on never stopped sorting men into winners and losers, based on nothing more substantial than a foreman's glance. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about the working men who built the British Empire on their backs while earning barely enough to feed their families. Real people, real struggle. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family worked the docks. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for making sure Thomas Brennan and James Sullivan don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.